The crystal chandelier hanging above the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel shimmered like a suspended constellation, casting a golden, forgiving light over the city's elite. It was a light that made diamonds sparkle brighter and hid the wrinkles of worry on the faces of men who had leveraged their futures on risky bets. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck, heavy perfume, and old money. Waiters in white jackets moved through the room with the silence of ghosts, pouring vintage champagne that cost more per bottle than most families spent on groceries in a month. At the center of it all, at table number 12, sat the Sterling family. To the 500 guests in the room, they were the picture of American perfection. David Sterling, the visionary architect whose steel and glass towers defined the city skyline, sat with his posture perfectly straight, adjusting his silk tie with a hand that had shaken hands with presidents. Beside him was Elena, his wife, the philanthropic heart of the city, a woman whose grace was as legendary as her family's fortune. And across from them sat 14-year-old Lily, looking uncomfortable in a dress that cost $4,000, pushing peas around her plate with a silver fork. The room erupted in applause as the mayor finished his opening remarks. David smiled for the cameras. He waved to his business partners. He looked like a man on top of the world. But David Sterling was a man drowning, and he had been holding his breath for a very long time. While the room turned its attention toward the stage for the next speaker, David leaned forward. The movement was casual, the kind of shift a husband makes to check on his wife. He reached for the bottle of chilled water to refill his glass, but his hand hovered over Elena's champagne flute. It happened in the blink of an eye. With a sleight of hand that would have impressed a street magician, a tiny cascade of fine white powder slipped from the French cuff of his tuxedo shirt. It fell into the bubbling gold liquid of Elena's glass and vanished instantly. David sat back. He smoothed his jacket. He checked his Rolex. He glanced around the table, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, but his face remained a mask of calm. He thought no one saw him. He thought he was invisible in the crowd. He was wrong. Across the centerpiece of white orchids, Lily had frozen. Her fork was suspended halfway to her mouth. The noise of the gala, the clinking silverware, the polite laughter, the jazz band playing softly in the corner, all of it seemed to drop away into a vacuum of silence. All she could see was her father's hand. She had seen the powder fall. She had seen the slight tremor in his fingers, a tremor she had never seen before in the hands of the man who drew straight lines for a living. And then she saw the way he looked at her mother. It wasn't a look of love. It wasn't a look of admiration. It was a look of cold, terrifying calculation. It was the way a man looks at a problem he is about to solve. Lily's stomach twisted into a knot. Her breath hitched in her throat. She wanted to say something. She wanted to scream, to knock the glass over, to ask him what he was doing. But then David looked up. He locked eyes with her across the flowers. For a second, panic flared in his pupils. But he crushed it instantly. He smiled at her. He winked. A playful, fatherly wink. The kind of wink he gave her when he snuck her an extra piece of chocolate cake before dinner. But the sweat beading on his forehead told a different story. She wasn't supposed to see that. She was just a child. But in that split second, the veil of her perfect childhood was ripped away. And what she decided to do in the next hour would determine whether her mother lived or died, and whether her father would walk out of this hotel a free man or in handcuffs. If you enjoy intense, true-style crime dramas like this, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. The stories we are coming up are even darker than this one. To understand why a man like David Sterling would poison his wife in a room full of witnesses, you have to look past the tuxedo and the smile. You have to understand the lie that the Sterlings have been living for the past 2 years. To the public, they were American royalty. David was a genius who built the Sterling Tower, the tallest building in the state. Elena was the heiress who funded the children's hospital. They were the couple on the magazine covers, the couple everyone envied. They had the yacht, the summer house in the Hamptons, the winter chalet in Aspen, but behind the wrought iron gates of their estate, the foundation was rotting. The recession had hit David hard, much harder than anyone knew. The Sterling Tower project had gone tens of millions of dollars over budget. He had faced zoning issues, union strikes, and material shortages. To keep the project alive, David had stopped using the bank. The banks had cut him off months ago. He had started using private lenders. The kind of lenders who didn't ask for credit scores, but asked for collateral that David didn't technically own. He had leveraged everything. The house, the cars, even Lily's college fund. And finally, in a moment of supreme desperation, he had forged Elena's signature to secure a massive loan against her family's trust. He was bleeding money. 7 figures a month were flying out the door just to pay the interest on his debts. Elena didn't know. She was owed money. She was principled, sharp, and terrifyingly honest. Elena believed in rules. She believed in justice. If she knew David had committed fraud, if she knew he had stolen from her trust, she wouldn't just divorce him. She would turn him in. She would view it as her moral duty. For months, David had been living in a pressure cooker. He stopped sleeping. He started drinking scotch at 10 in the morning just to steady his hands. He would watch his wife across the dinner table, terrified that she could read the guilt written on his face. He felt like a man standing on a trapdoor, waiting for the lever to be pulled. Then came the gala. The Hope for Tomorrow Gala was Elena's biggest night of the year. She was a keynote speaker. But 3 days ago, David had made a mistake. He had left his iPad unlocked on the kitchen counter. When he came back, Elena was scrolling through it. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes had changed. Then, yesterday, he found an email draft on her laptop. It was addressed to her family's lawyer. The subject line read simply, "Forensic Accounting Inquiry." She suspected something. She was going to announce a restructuring of their family trust during her speech tonight. If she did that, the auditors would come in, the loans would be exposed, the forgery would be discovered, David would be ruined. He would go to federal prison for decades. He didn't want to kill her. He told himself that in the mirror 1,000 times while he shaved that morning. He loved her, in his own twisted, desperate way. He still loved her. He just needed to pause her. He needed a medical emergency. He needed something dramatic enough to cancel the speech, get her to hospital, and keep her incapacitated for 48 hours. That was all the time he needed. Just 2 days to fly to the Cayman Islands, liquidate the offshore account he had been hiding, and fill the hole in the trust before the auditors looked. He had gone to a contact in the city's nightlife district, a man he had met years ago on a construction site who had connections to the underground drug trade. He asked for something strong, something that would knock someone out cold but look like a fainting spell. The man had given him a small packet of white powder. Just a strong sedative, David told himself. She'll feel dizzy. She'll faint on stage. We'll go to the hospital. She'll sleep for 2 days. I'll fix the money. I'll save the family. It was a plan born of madness and desperation. But desperation makes men sloppy, and it makes them blind to who is watching. The gala was in full swing now. The air was stiflingly hot despite the air conditioning. A jazz band played a slow, rhythmic tune that felt to Lily like a heartbeat. She stared at the champagne glass. It sat there, innocent and deadly, right next to her mother's hand. The bubbles rose to the surface, popping softly. Lily felt a wave of nausea. Her mind was racing, trying to process the impossible. Maybe she was crazy. Maybe it was just sugar. Maybe her dad was just playing a trick. But why would he hide it in his cuff? Why was he sweating? Why was he tapping his foot so nervously under the table? "Are you all right, Lil Bit?" David asked. Lily jumped. She looked up at him. His voice was smooth, practicing the charm that had sold a dozen skyscrapers. He was smiling, but his eyes were hard. They were warning her. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clinking of china. She looked at her dad, really looked at him. This was the man who taught her how to ride a bike without training wheels. The man who sat on the floor and helped her build Lego castles. The man who checked under her bed for monsters every single night until she was 10. Now he was the monster. "You look beautiful tonight, Elena," David said, turning to his wife. His voice wavered slightly, a crack in facade. "Are you ready for your speech?" Elena sighed, rubbing her temples. She looked exhausted. The stress of the last few months, the distance growing between her and David, the suspicion eating away at her trust, it had all taken a toll. Her skin was pale against the emerald green of her dress. "I just want this night to be over," David, she said softly, I have a lot on my mind. We need to talk later. Really talk. About the accounts. David's jaw tightened. The muscle in his cheek twitched. Of course, darling. Anything you want. But first, a toast. To your hard work. To the children you're helping. He lifted his glass. This was it. The moment of no return. Lily's hands gripped the tablecloth, so hard her knuckles turned white. Do something, her brain screamed. Spill your water. Fake a cough. Throw a tantrum. Anything to stop that glass from touching her lips. But fear is a paralyzing drug. She was 14. She was a child in a room full of powerful adults. And this was her father, the authority figure of her life. If she accused him and she was wrong, she would humiliate him in front of the mayor. She would be the crazy daughter who ruined the gala. But if she was right, her world ended anyway. To the future, David said, clinking his glass against Elena's. The sound of the crystal ringing out was sharp, piercing through the ambient noise like a gunshot. Elena smiled, a sad, weary smile that broke Lily's heart. She lifted the glass to her lips. David watched. He didn't blink. He leaned in slightly, his breath held. Lily watched. She couldn't breathe. Her lungs felt like they had turned to stone. Elena took a sip, then another. She set the glass down on the white tablecloth. Delicious, she murmured, unaware that she had just swallowed a chemical weapon. David exhaled. It was a long, shaky breath that hissed through his teeth. The deed was done. There was no going back now. The chemical was in her system. Now, he just had to wait for the biology to take over. Put yourself in Lily's shoes for a second. You're 14 years old. You just saw your father poison your mother, but you aren't 100% sure what it is. Do you scream and cause a scene in front of the whole city? Or do you stay silent and pray she's okay? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? 10 minutes passed. To David, it felt like 10 years. Every second was an agony of anticipation. He watched Elena's face for signs of drowsiness. He watched her eyelids. The master of ceremonies, a man with a booming voice and a shiny tuxedo, walked to the podium. The spotlight swung across the room, blinding in its intensity. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the woman of the hour, the founder of the Hope for Tomorrow initiative, Elena Sterling. Applause erupted. It was thunderous, filling the cavernous ballroom. Elena stood up. She smoothed her emerald green dress. She looked regal. She looked powerful. She took one step toward the stage, her heels clicking on the parquet floor. Then she stopped. It wasn't a stumble. It was a freeze. Her hand went to her throat, her fingers clutching at her diamond necklace as if it were suddenly choking her. At table 12, David stood up quickly, feigning concern. He was ready for this part. This was the part where he played the hero. Elena? Elena turned to look at him. Her eyes were confused at first. She tried to say his name. She opened her mouth, but only a strangled, wet rasp came out. Then, the confusion turned to terror. She stumbled sideways, knocking into a passing waiter. A tray of silver champagne flutes crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. The sound silenced the room instantly. The applause died. The band stopped playing. Elena, David shouted, his voice pitching up perfectly for the audience. Someone help. She's collapsing. But this wasn't the drowsiness David had expected. This wasn't a gentle faint. This wasn't a sleeping beauty moment. Elena fell to her knees, clawing at her neck. Her skin, usually so pale and perfect, was turning a bright, angry flush. Her breath came in ragged, whistling gasps that echoed in the silent room. She was convulsing, her body seizing up in violent spasms. David froze. The script was going wrong. The sedative, he had bought it from a contact who swore it was clean, was supposed to make her dizzy. He didn't know about the interaction. He didn't know that the sedative was cut with synthetic opioid. And he certainly didn't know that when mixed with Elena's daily blood pressure medication, it created a massive histamine reaction. He wasn't putting her to sleep. He was suffocating her. He was watching her drown on dry land. "Mom!" Lily screamed. It was a primal sound, a sound that tore through the polite society atmosphere like a knife. Lily launched herself out of her chair, sliding across the polished floor to her mother's side. She grabbed Elena's hand. It was cold and clammy. Elena was thrashing on the floor, her eyes rolling back into her head, so only the whites showed. Foam, pink with blood where she had bitten her tongue, gathered at the corners of her mouth. "Call 911. Someone shouted from the crowd. "Is there a doctor? Give her space." "Back up." David knelt beside them. His face was pale. And for the first time that night, he wasn't acting. The terror in his eyes was real. Not because he was losing his wife, but because he was losing control. "Elena, breathe. Breathe, honey," David yelled, shaking her shoulders. Lily looked up at him. She saw the terror. She saw the regret. She saw the realization dawning on him that he had gone too far. But then she looked at her mother, whose lips were turning blue. The spotlight was still on them. 500 of the city's elite watched in horror as the perfect family crumbled on the ballroom floor. Cameras flashed, capturing the tragedy in high definition. The ride to St. Jude's Hospital was a blur of sirens, red lights, and static from radio. Lily sat in the front seat of the ambulance, her knees pulled up to her chest, numb. Through the small window, she watched the paramedics working on her mother. Intubate. Push AP. Clear. Shock. The rhythmic commands were the only sounds in her world. She watched her mother's body jump as the defibrillator hit her. She watched the tube go down her throat. David followed in the Rolls-Royce. He gripped the steering wheel so tight the leather squeaked under his palms. He was vomiting words to himself, a mantra of panic. "Please don't die. Please don't die. I'll fix it. I'll fix the money. Just don't die. If you die, it's murder. If you live, it's an accident. Just live." At the hospital, the VIP waiting room was a cage of beige walls and sterile smells. David paced the length of the room, back and forth, like a tiger in a zoo. He made calls to his lawyer, whispering in the corner, trying to frame the narrative before the press got wind of the details. Stress, he told the lawyer, wiping sweat from his brow. "She's been under so much stress with the charity. It was a stroke. We need to release a statement." A stroke brought on by exhaustion. Lily sat on a plastic orange chair, her expensive gala dress stained with spilled champagne and floor dust. She looked small. She looked broken. She watched her father. He was performing. Even now, with his wife on life support down the hall, he was managing the image. He wiped his eyes when the nurses walked by. He looked stoic and strong. He touched Lily's shoulder gently when the doctor passed. But Lily knew. She felt the weight of the secret sitting in her chest like a stone. The conflict raging inside her was tearing her apart. She was a daddy's girl. David was her hero. He was the one who bought her ice cream when she was sad. He was the one who promised her she could be anything she wanted. If she spoke up, if she told the truth, she would lose him. They would take him away. She would be an orphan. Maybe I imagined it, she told herself, squeezing her eyes shut. Maybe it was just sugar. Maybe he was adding sweetener to her drink because the champagne was dry. Maybe the wink was just a wink. But she remembered the sweat. She remembered the shaking hand. She remembered the look. A detective approached them. Detective Miller. He looked tired, wearing a cheap gray suit that contrasted sharply with David's bespoke tuxedo. He had seen too many rich people try to hide their sins, and he had a look of cynical exhaustion. "Mr. Sterling?" the detective asked. David straightened up instantly. The grieving husband mask slid into place. "Is she okay? Can I see her? Is she conscious?" "She's stable, but in a medically induced coma," Miller said, flipping open a small notebook. "The doctors are confused, though. The symptoms don't look like a standard stroke or a heart attack. They're running a full toxicology screen now." David's face didn't move. He was a statue. But Lily, watching closely, saw his hand twitch at his side. A tiny, involuntary spasm. "Toxicology?" David asked, his voice perfectly calibrated to sound confused and slightly offended. "She doesn't do drugs, detective. My wife is a saint. She runs a children's charity. She barely drinks." "Standard procedure," Sir Miller said, his eyes scanning David's face for any micro-expressions. He turned his eyes to Lily. Young lady, you were sitting right next to her. Did she eat anything unusual? Did she complain of anything? The room went quiet. The hum of the vending machine seemed deafening. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like a bomb counting down. David turned to Lily. He didn't plead with his eyes. He didn't beg. He just looked at her with a heavy, crushing weight of expectation. We are Sterlings, the look said. We protect our own. We do not air our dirty laundry. Silence is loyalty. Lily looked at the detective, a man searching for the truth. Then she looked at her father, a man hiding from it. Lily started. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. She just had the champagne. David exhaled, an imperceptible release of tension. But, Lily continued. David's head snapped back to her. His eyes widened slightly. But what? The detective asked, leaning in, sensing the shift in the air. Lily looked at her hands. She twisted the fabric of her dress. Nothing, just the champagne. She couldn't do it. She couldn't send her father to prison. She chose silence. She chose to protect the lie. But secrets in a hospital don't stay secret for long. Science has a way of exposing what people try to hide. 2 hours later, the double doors swung open. A doctor in scrubs walked out. He wasn't smiling. He looked grim. He was followed by 2 police officers who looked very alert. David stood up. Doctor? Mr. Sterling. The doctor said, his voice cold and clinical. We got the blood work back from the lab. And? David asked, taking a step forward. It wasn't a stroke. Your wife has a massive dose of Rohypnol and a synthetic opioid in her system. It triggered a severe, life-threatening allergic reaction with her heart medication. The air left the room. It was as if a vacuum had sucked out all the oxygen. Rohypnol? David feigned shock. He put a hand to his chest. That's a date rape drug. How would she? He turned to the officers, his voice rising in righteous anger. Someone must have slipped it to her at the party. One of the waiters. Or a guest. You have to investigate the staff. You have to lock down the hotel. He was good. He was so good. He was channeling all his rage, all his fear, and all his guilt into a performance of a grieving, angry husband seeking justice for his wife. We are investigating everyone, Detective Miller said, stepping forward. His tone was harder now, less polite, but we need to check the glass. We have a forensic team at the plaza, securing the table right now, and we will be checking security footage. David nodded vigorously. Yes, find the monster who did this. I want him found, and I want him destroyed. Lily sat there, trembling. She watched her father lie. She watched him blame faceless waiters. She watched him act the part of the victim. And in that moment, something inside her broke. She realized then that he wasn't just desperate. He wasn't just a man in financial trouble who made a mistake. He was a coward. He was willing to destroy innocent people's lives, waiters, staff, guests, just to save his own skin. He was willing to let a stranger go to jail for his crime. He didn't love her mother. He loved himself. And then the memory hit her, a detail she had missed in the chaos. The cuff. When David had leaned over to pour the powder, the packet hadn't fallen into the glass. The powder had. But the wrapper, he hadn't thrown the packet away. He didn't have time. He couldn't drop it on the floor. He had simply tucked the empty foil wrapper back up his sleeve. She looked at his left wrist. The expensive silver cufflink glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital. The cuff was stiff, starched perfectly. Dad, Lily said. Her voice was different now. It wasn't the voice of a child. It was the voice of someone who had just grown up too fast. David turned, annoyed at the interruption during his performance. Not now, Lily. Dad, she said, standing up. Her legs felt shaky, but she locked her knees. Lily, please. David snapped, his patience fraying. The police are trying to help Mom. Show them your wrist, she said. The words hung in the air. The silence that followed was absolute. The detective looked at Lily, his interest piqued. Then he looked at David. Excuse me? David said, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. Lily, you're in shock. You need water. Sit down. Show them your sleeve, Lily said, tears streaming down her face, hot and fast. The left one. Where you hid the wrapper. David's face went white. Not pale. White. Like a sheet of paper. He looked at his daughter, and for the first time, he didn't see a fan. He didn't see a dependent. He saw a judge. Lily. Stop it, David hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that the police couldn't hear. You don't know what you're saying. You are ruining everything. I saw you, Lily screamed, the dam finally breaking. I saw you put the powder in her drink. I saw you. She's hysterical. David shouted at the police, backing away. She's traumatized. She doesn't know what she's seeing. She's imagining things. Irk, raise your hands. Detective Miller ordered. His hand rested on his holster. The change in the room was instant. The officers moved in, flanking David. This is ridiculous. David backed away toward the door. I am David Sterling. I built this city. You can't touch me. Raise your hands. David looked at the exit. It was blocked. Then he looked at his wrist. Instinctively, foolishly, he tried to jam his hand into his pocket to hide the evidence. Don't do it, the officer yelled. They tackled him. David Sterling, the architect of the skyline, the man of the year, hit the dirty linoleum floor of the hospital waiting room with a sickening thud. As they twisted his arms behind his back to cuff him, the officers rolled up his left sleeve. There, tucked neatly against the starch of his shirt, caught between the fabric and his skin, was a tiny, crumpled piece of silver foil. Trace residue. The smoking gun. David looked up from the floor. His cheek was pressed against the tiles. He locked eyes with Lily one last time. There was no anger anymore, just a hollow, shattered realization that he had lost the only thing that actually mattered. He had built a tower of lies, and his own daughter had pulled the cornerstone out. 3 days later, the sun streamed through the blinds of room 404. It was a bright, cruel morning light. Elena was awake. She was weak, pale, and hooked up to a dozen machines, but she was alive. She sat up in bed, holding Lily's hand. The TV in the corner was muted, but the headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screen were clear. Sterling scandal. Billionaire architect charged with attempted murder. Financial fraud exposed. The fraud had all come out. The loans, the embezzlement, the fake accounts. David's house of cards had collapsed the moment he was arrested. The investigation revealed the depth of his betrayal. He had planned to hospitalize her just long enough to stop the audit. He had gambled with her life to save his reputation. He had tried to stay the hero, and in doing so, he had cemented his legacy as a villain. I'm sorry, Mom, Lily whispered, her head resting on the bedsheet. I should have said something sooner. Before you drank it. I was so scared. Elena stroked her daughter's hair with a trembling hand. Her voice was raspy, damaged from the intubation, but was filled with a fierce love. You saved me, Lily. You were brave when it mattered. You stood up to him. That is the hardest thing anyone can do. He wanted to fix things, Lily said, tears soaking the sheet. He kept saying he could fix it. He kept saying he did it for us. Some things can't be fixed, Elena said softly, looking out the window at the city her husband had helped build. Some things just have to be broken so you can build something real in their place. He built us a life on a foundation of sand, Lily. It was always going to fall. The camera pans out from the hospital window, looking over the city skyline. The Sterling Tower stood tall and gleaming, reflecting the morning sun. It looked perfect from a distance. It looked strong. But down on the street, in the shadows, the truth was always waiting. David Sterling wanted to control the narrative. He wanted to be the architect of his own reality. But in the end, he taught his daughter the most important lesson of all. The truth is the only antidote to poison. This story proves that you never really know what happens behind the closed doors of the wealthy. But if you think David's betrayal was shocking, wait until you hear the story of the Manhattan socialite who hired a hitman for her own twin sister. Click the video on your screen right now to watch that story. You won't believe the twist ending.